All right, let's go ahead and begin. My name is also Tui, President of the Hawaii State Teachers Association. Before we begin today, I want to recognize and acknowledge the work of the volunteer members of our negotiations team. I'm going to call out their names and ask that they turn on their cameras, or as you can see, it's already turned on. First of all, we have our chair, Diane Mokuao from the Molokaʻi chapter. Our vice chair, Jenny Oleon from the Hilo chapter. We have Kathy Shibuya from the Kauai chapter. David Nygaard from the Maui chapter, Lisa Morrison from the Maui chapter and your state secretary treasurer, and Logan Okita from the Central chapter and your state vice president. I'd also like to acknowledge the work of our executive director, Ann Mahi, our deputy executive director and chief negotiator, Andrea Eshelman, and our negotiations and research specialist, Colleen Berg, all three of whom were integral in supporting our work at the table. Andrea is joining us and will help lead the briefing. I also want to thank Inga and Vicky, who are helping us to interpret for our deaf members. Today, we'll review the terms of the settlement agreement and also answer questions that have come into HSTA in the last week. In addition, we encourage you to go to www.hsta.org/contract, where you can find all of the various documents and resources related to the contract settlement. There, you will find an FAQ document that continues to be updated. You can also talk with members of our staff, leadership, and/or negotiations committee and the team at the ratification sites around the state on Wednesday. Look for the information desk at each site. Please note, we will be recording and posting this presentation. As such, we will not be addressing questions that are personal in nature. We've prepared a list of questions based off of our FAQ and previously submitted questions. In addition, we will attempt to address questions you can submit through the Q&A option of the Zoom webinar. Don't worry, we can't see you. You won't be able to turn on your cameras or your microphones. So just sit back, relax, and listen in. Before I turn it over to Andrea Eshelman, our chief negotiator, to give an overview of the settlement, I wanted to provide a few thoughts on this settlement. Now, because of the hard work that our union forebears put in during HSTA's more than 50 years, we no longer have to bargain things like duty-free lunch, which was not always a given. We don't have to bargain non-professional duties like cleaning our classrooms and emptying the trash. We don't have to bargain to get guaranteed prep periods and other things that we take for granted today. But the struggles still persist, and there will always be struggles to push back on. In this latest struggle to secure advances in our next contract, we were able to come away with charter school recognition in the contract for the first time ever, improvements to the grievance process when a grievance involves more than one member, paving the way for electronic sign-in in the future, expanding early release time opportunities to general education teachers for IEP meetings. Additional language on the protection of personal information, as well as more protective language on harassment, discrimination, and bullying-free workplaces, requiring that administrators document actions taken around health and safety complaints, improvements to due process for those placed under investigation, instituting a pilot program with guardrails in place for teachers should a school have to close for short or extended periods of time, and continuing and creating work groups for teacher transfer, English learners, EES, special education, student discipline, Hawaiian education, CTE, and teacher leaves. Those are the ones that don't involve money directly into your pockets. And for some of you, you think they're small and inconsequential for you until something happens and you rely on precise language to push back against administrators who will often find a way to make things more difficult for you. With regards to money in your pockets, we've secured increases to supplementary pay amounts that have not changed for a very long time, updating mileage rates to be in line with IRS allowances, and increasing paid time when having to fly for work from 60 minutes beforehand to 90 minutes. Embedding 21 hours with extra PD and approximately 1.5% pay permanently into the contract, so we don't have to beg every year. Increases to health plan contributions, where if current health plan enrollments were to remain constant, the employer is going to eat 95% of the total additional costs over the whole unit. Reworking emergency higher pay to something much more livable, going from $38,000 to $50,000. Step movements in year 1 and year 3 to continue the every other year movement to keep in line with your years of service. The first year step is in addition to a 2% increase in the salary schedule for approximately 5% total in the first year. Significant payouts to those who did not receive compression adjustments earlier this year of $3,000. Those of you who are at 14B before compression was fixed will get a total of $6,000 after working the first day of next school year. $3,000 for not having a compression adjustment, and $3,000 for, like all of the others who are at the top next year and have no more steps higher when everyone else gets a step. And that's in addition to the 2% across the board. And finally, the creation of Class 8. Remember, while we have a list of things that we want to be wins, the employer was also motivated to come away with a list of wins for themselves as well. That is how negotiations go. One of their wins is surrounding Class 8. Their win is requiring the sheltered instruction professional development to be completed. Their win is only credits from July 1st, 2023 and beyond. Our win is bringing the credit requirement down from 30 credits that they originally expected to 15 credits, like all the other classes required to move. More than half of the people I introduced that are on our negotiations team are at Class 7, and they have bank credits that the state is saying they and others now have to throw away. This was an extremely tough pill to swallow for all of us. But in the end, Class 8 was determined to be so important by the team because it will then become established for future generations to come. Just like colleagues before us from years past fought for things that we take for granted now, there is always compromise involved. How many of you remember the true-up salary schedule? This was a salary schedule put out in 2011 that was 28 steps with a little each step and was based on the number of years of service that you had. Notwithstanding other issues with that particular contract involving teacher evaluations and race to the top, once we voted the package down, the true-up salary schedule was never something the state would agree to again. That one opportunity was gone for good. And I worry that the same could be true about Class 8. Some claim that we're fear-mongering, but no, it's our duty to let members know what happens if they vote a contract down. We don't want members to say, I didn't know if we voted it down, we would lose this. All I'll say is don't let perfect be the enemy of good. This is a good package that your negotiations team secured, and your board of directors unanimously agreed to put out recommending ratification to the bargaining unit. In 2011, part of the reason that contract was voted down was because not enough time was given to consider everything that was agreed to. I will tell you that we've had legislators question us, asking why are we taking so long to vote and cutting it so close to the legislative session's ending? The reply is that we are giving our members time to digest the contents of this tentative agreement. We're having this webinar right now to explain the nuances and answer questions, and members have the opportunity to make an informed decision on Wednesday. I urge you to show up to the voting sites, get your colleagues to show up to the voting sites, and vote yes to ratify this tentative agreement. Andrea?
Thanks, Osa. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail for folks. I noticed there are a few questions that have come through in the chat and as well as on the Q&A. I would ask if folks can please direct their questions that we will get to in a little bit to the Q&A, that'll make it a lot easier for us to track. We have hundreds of people on this webinar right now, and so it makes it a little bit confusing to try and track in multiple places. As we indicated earlier, this is recorded, so you will be able to review it again at your leisure and share it with your colleagues if they would like to watch it and they missed it. And we do have it set as a webinar feature so that your cameras and your audio remain off so that everyone has a good experience. So we reached a settlement on April 14th. We completed the successor negotiations. We then used our internal process to bring the settlement to the committee as well as the board. And as Osa indicated, the board has recommended that folks vote yes, and they've sent it out for ratification. So I'm going to go through in a little bit more detail what Osa shared as to the settlement, give you something that you can kind of see visually, and then we will also talk about or show you some resources of where you can review things on the website. Okay. Move some stuff out of my way so I can see things. All right, so it is a 4-year contract, big picture, with a reopener on EUTF. So those are your health benefits. So there is a change in knowledge of what the rates will be every couple of years. And so there is a reopener opportunity on the EUTF benefits that will happen at the midpoint of this contract. The other big piece, as Osa indicated, is the 21 hours are made permanent. So one of the benefits of that is that since 2013, we've had 21 hours of job embedded professional development, and we had to renegotiate every 2 years and seek out funding for that to continue. And as many of you experienced last school year, we lost that due to the budget cuts. And then we were able to renegotiate it last summer and get it for the 2nd year of the current contract we're in. By making those 21 hours permanent and continuing to have the 3 PD credits, the benefit long-term for our members is that even if you take no other professional development classes, you'll get those 3 PD credits as long as you do the time at school. And every 5 years, you would be able to use that for a reclassification. Now, we know that there are people that have already reclassified, and we'll talk about Class 8 a little bit later, but that is the other thing that we got in this contract was the creation of a Class 8. We also restructured the instructor pay levels. So some of our lowest paid folks on the salary schedule were making as low as $38,000 a year. That really isn't a living wage. And so we restructured it and eliminated 3 steps of that schedule to create a new step 4. And so our instructor folks are people who are not state approved teacher ed program folks who are working towards that licensure will be on a new step. In the area of ETF funding, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later, we are getting an increase in the contributions by the employer. So not having it remain flat, and as Osa indicated, that means that going forward, the employer is going to take on 95% of the cost increases across the unit. We were able to successfully get the cap lifted a little bit higher. So in some cases, your medical plan will be covered by the employer at a 90% rate. In the first year of the school year, next school year, 23-24, first year of the contract, there's a 2% across the board pay raise as well as a step movement, which is about 3% for folks. If you are moving from 14A to 14B, it is actually a 6% bump. That is something that's been embedded in the contract for many years that folks don't know about. But 14A to 14B is a 6%. All the other ones are 3% difference. And so that equates to approximately 5% depending on where you are on the schedule. 14Bs who are at the top of the schedule, many folks got moved there just in the last year with the compression adjustments, will in addition receive a $3,000 lump sum payment. The $3,000, there's an additional $3,000 for anyone who did not receive compression adjustments. So anybody that was step 5 and above this school year, who was also employed last school year, there's some caveats applying the same sort of measurements that they did for the compression adjustments. You will also receive $3,000. So that means if you were already at 14B at the start of this school year, and so thus you didn't receive a compression adjustment, there was no step to move to, you will receive both your $3,000 lump sum for not having a step to move, as well as an additional $3,000 for the compression, for a total of $6,000. That is paid out right at the start of the school year. We've had a few people who have asked and queried about, I'm planning to retire mid-year. I'm planning to retire in December. Will it get prorated? The answer is no. It's going to be paid out right at the start of the school year. If you decide to retire later on, then there's no take back or proration of that. And I already mentioned the 21 hours will be added to the contract. So 21 hours are worth about 1.5% for everybody. By making this permanent, we're not having to worry about going back to a lower base salary. This will continue to be the base salary that we add then another 2% onto, and then everybody moves a step. And then in the next year, we have the successive pay raises. As I indicated earlier, the instructor levels will be modified. So we'll be eliminating step 1, 2, and 3, creating a step 4. There will now be 3% between step 4 and 5. And then that step 4 will be extended the full length of the schedule. We've had a few people ask about when the schedules are going to be ready. I will tell you that my negotiation specialist, Colleen, myself, Osa, we've been working with the department on the numbers. We are waiting for some follow-up with them because we have a couple of questions about how they calculated it. We didn't want to publish anything as being final because there's a few dollar differences that we're trying to work through. As soon as those are ready, we will get those out to folks even before the final contract is printed. It's not unusual that people want to look at those. We do have a couple of preliminary salary charts for you folks to use to see where you might end up based on where you currently are, and we'll talk about those a little bit later. In addition, the extending of the full length of the schedule will allow folks who are at step 4 to potentially reclassify along step 4. That reclassification also will include no loss of class or service time upon earning their SATEP. So what that means is currently you have to be reassessed all over again once you move to step 5 and have your SATEP. What this means is you'll be able to move vertically up. So if you on step 4 reclassified to class 4 or 5, you would move vertically up on the salary schedule. We also negotiated some specifics about how we treat those folks who are holding a standard limited license in CTE, which is a very nuanced special type of license, and those that have CTE permits and Hawaiian permits. All of those people are folks who do not have bachelor's degrees and have various special permissions and license status to be able to teach in public schools in Hawaii. In the year 2, 3, and 4 of the contract, we have continuing raises, a 3% across the board in the second year, a step movement in the third year, again, 14B is receiving that $3,000 lump sum in lieu of not having a step to move to, and then the addition of class 8. The class 8 will be 4% more than class 4, and so once you are at class 7, excuse me, not class 4, class 7, it is 4% more to move to class 8. And then in the last year of the contract, it is a 3.5% across the board pay raise. Okay. So I will note on the 21 hours, a couple of other things that folks should be aware of. If you go in and read the tentative agreement language, you will note a couple of things. One is it's the 21 hours is being added permanently into the work year section of the contract. It used to be an MOU that would expire or sunset every 2 years. And by doing that, we're standardizing any of our extended day types of things. So we'll still have the 6 hours of extended day. We'll have 21 hours. We'll still get the 3 PD credits. It will be in 30-minute blocks for scheduling. The principal still is supposed to get feedback from teachers on how those days will be used. And then we got the insertion of a minimum of 2 work days notice, which is a new provision in the work year section. And so just be aware of those additional protections. The supplementary pay, as Osa indicated, is increased by 50% and rounded to the nearest 100. We were successful in collapsing the large and small school department head and GLC pay into one pay category of $1,900. part of the discussions at the table is that regardless if you were responsible for 3 teachers or 10 teachers, regardless if you come from a big school or a small school, being a DH is a big responsibility. And we felt that it made sense to have a standard pay amount that it was at. We also inserted the mentor teacher pay, which up until now has been a separate agreement that we've had to renegotiate every few years. This is now put into the contract in the MOU in the back for first year mentor teachers, $750 and $1,000 for second year teachers. And then you can see the other dollar amounts. One question that we have gotten is what happened to our proposal for supplementary pay for club advisors. So we did have a proposal on that. The employer was unwilling to agree to those changes for club advisors. We do know that this is an area we have to continue to advocate for. We know that those folks play a really important role in our school communities, but the department was not willing to look at those costs. In part, they did not have strong numbers to be able to cost that. And so that's one of the things that our committee is going to have to look for in the future to try and see if there is any way we can come up with some numbers on how many club advisors are out there. And then within that subset, how many are competition type club advisors, because we were looking at those dynamics. Okay. In the area of reclassification, as many of you folks know, we were able to negotiate the addition of a class 8 in the 3rd year of the contract. Osa touched on this a little bit earlier. This is probably, like, out of all the hundreds of questions we've gotten, half of them tend to be this. We have lots of questions about class 8 and what does it mean and how come it's structured this way, so on and so forth. So I'll try to address a couple of things. One is it's a 4% difference from class 7 to class 8. The other is that the employer was not willing to look at adding a class 8 at all at first. They just were not simply interested in it at all. As we move through and emphasize that, hey, this is really important. We have about 1/3 of our unit at class 7. They were not interested in looking at our new salary construct. They said that was too expensive, too complicated. When we moved back to saying, okay, well, what are the other things we can do? Let's look at a class 8. When we got them to the point that they were willing to look at that class 8, then it was, oh, well, we'll only do it with 30 credits. And you have to have your sheltered instruction, and you have to have, it has to be all new credits. And so they're adding all of these requirements. Their rationale and their very firm position was that they needed to incentivize people to secure their sheltered instruction qualification. And so that was an absolute must-have for us adding any new classification to the schedule. They're very adamant about the July 1, 2023 number, in part because of the cost, because we know that we have people sitting on a lot of credits. And it would cost in the ballpark of $35 million right off the bat if they were to have all those folks who are sitting on credits reclassified. We talked about the dynamic that we have people who are sitting on 21 hours credits. We talked about the dynamic that people have been improving themselves, and this was the best that we could get. We felt it was important to grab an option for a class 8 than to give it up and walk away from the table and not have secured something. And going forward, for the people coming down the pipe, those folks will have a little bit more flexibility than the people right here and now. Couple of things that I will say is that if you have credits that you're sitting on that you have not used for reclassification that were earned related to your SIQ, your sheltered instruction, you can use those for reclassification. In the next 2 years, everybody will earn 6 credits towards their 21 hours. So you would only have to secure an additional 9 if you're at class 7 to move into class 8. There are no other changes to the current reclassification rules for folks who are still moving from 2 to 3, 3 to 4, so on and so forth. The only new restrictions are for class 8. I've had people ask, well, what happens to all my banked credits? How come I can't use them for the time being? You can still use them for the early classifications, but there is this structure for moving to class 8 for this this new addition. And it is in the 3rd year of the contract. Okay. The area of teacher travel. As also indicated, we have gotten some changes to teacher travel. Some of you may not think that this is significant, but it is quite significant. There haven't been changes to teacher travel in many, many years. This really impacts our neighbor island folks who have to travel to Oahu frequently for professional development and meetings and things like that. It also impacts many of our non-classroom teachers that might need to travel to the neighbor islands to provide support for those schools. So increasing the start time of your day by an additional 30 minutes, you're getting paid from the 90 minutes prior to your flight is really important, because right now people are telling us they'd had to get to the airport earlier, and that's all on their time. Eliminating the very outdated mileage rates that were in the contract, and then also making it very clear that if you were assigned an alternate workstation assignment for that day, that would qualify for mileage. This is, for example, people who are on the island of Oahu, and you get told that you need to report tomorrow to the Sheraton for a teacher PD day, or those folks who might be on the neighbor islands and you might be in Hilo and told that you have to go to Waikoloa for the day. You will qualify for mileage as they are assigning you an alternate workstation to report to. And so this is a huge win for folks, not having to dig into their pockets and spend additional gas money to get transported to those locations. Okay. For EUTF, we talked a little bit about the cap already, and we are working towards, and our long-term goal is obviously to find plans that get 100% paid, but we now are at a point where we have the 90% piece. I'm going to actually jump out of my slide deck, and I'm going to show you folks the EUTF document that's on our website, and I'm going to have Osa speak a little bit about this.
Thanks, Andy. So what you see here, first of all, the UTF has extended open enrollment through May 12th, because after we ratify this, then these new rates become effective for us. So what you see in the first columns that say monthly amounts 22, 23, that's what you're paying this year. The plan rates in the white column, $918.28 for a single on the HMSA 9010. That's how much it costs total. And in the peach is what the employer is covering. They're paying $433.82 every month, and the employee, you are paying $486.46. Well, next year, the plan goes, the white column goes from the old 918 to the new 960. And out of that 960, again, the employer is going to cover 47.2%, which is $453, and you will cover $507.50. So the third column shows how much the employer is paying more, $19.54, how much the employee is paying more, $23.04, for a 4.8% increase if you're on the HMSA PPO 9010. Now, if you go down to that third section, don't go too far, sorry, Andrea. I need to talk about the HMSA PPO 7525. You'll see that if we just go to that last three columns, the employer will be paying for that plan $68.76 more for that plan. Employees, if you're on the 7520 this year, will be actually paying $20.02 less every month for that plan, for a decrease of 29.2%. And the reason for that is that the state has decided, and it's kind of the middle peach column, that they will now cover up to 90% of a plan instead of just 84.3% that they were willing to do before. We have so many of our members that are on the 7525 plan that by having those monthly savings, you know, $20 a month times 12 months, that's $240 over the year. So, and that's just for the self plan. If you multiply those two-party and the family plans by 12, those are significant savings. And so that's why the state is eating a lot of the cost. What you see on this first page is those of you who are employed starting January 1st, it says there, those employed starting January 1st, 2011 or later, or those who completely disenrolled in the HSTA VB plans. There's a second page for older timers. If you are an employee prior to January 1st, 2011, and you were enrolled in the old HSTA VIBA plans, you might still be on the VB plans and you can still move around within the VB plans. But nobody new can come in, and anyone who completely exits can never come back in. That was something that happened. That was a court order way back when the EUTF was created, or when HSTA was forced to go into the EUTF. And so that's how you read the chart. If you want to jump from a 90-10, which is an expensive plan, to a 75-25, the VB doesn't have the 75-25. You can do that during open enrollment. And so you can see very significant savings if you were to do that. So that's how you read the chart. Thank you very much.
And I will just note that they did extend open enrollment. And so that is extended for people to make adjustments. And if you already submitted a form, you can submit a second one if you've changed your mind and you want to make some sort of additional change based on the new numbers.
Yeah, so they will look at your last form submitted. If you can write amended on your form, if you've submitted one and you're submitting another because you want to change because of the new rates. If you submitted and the new rates came out, but you're still going to change to the same plan, you do not have to submit one more time. If you know that I'm going to go from HMSA to Kaiser, and I'm good with that, whatever the rates are, and you've already submitted, do not submit again.
All right, so that's EUTF. Some other areas that are not necessarily money per se that we were able to secure wins in are the areas of union rights, due process, and teacher protection. As Osa had indicated earlier, a lot of times people don't really think about these things until it impacts them directly. So one piece is finally getting the state to acknowledge and recognize charter schools in the CBA and the collective bargaining agreement. We've been trying to get this acknowledgement for years, since the point at which charter schools came on the scene 20 plus years ago. And the state was very resistant, thanks to the advocacy of some of our staff who recently won some really good arbitration awards related to charter schools. And frankly, the tenacity of our team, we were able to get just a reference to the statute, which may not seem like a lot, but it is very significant for charter teachers. I will note there was a question that came in from a teacher asking, are there differences in for the contract for charter teachers? Charter teachers fall under our master agreement, our main contract that we negotiate. They benefit from all the things that are in that agreement, but many charter schools also then utilize what's called a supplemental negotiations process to add additional benefits or modify their working conditions specific to their charter school. So that's the charter dynamic. We were able to get some small changes to clarify the grievance process, which for many of you may not matter, but it definitely matters as we work through class grievances and ensuring that folks have the ability to come and testify at the step 1 level. We were able to get language that clearly delineates that people's personal contact information is protected. This was an issue that came up quite a bit during COVID, where we had, we'll just say administrative staff and maybe others being a little too loose with teachers' personal contact information and giving out, especially folks' phone numbers. And so we got that put into the contract. We also got an acknowledgement in language around the fact that you have a right to a workplace that should be free from discrimination, harassment, and or bullying, and specificity about what should happen if you file a complaint. We were able to also get language that that you can ask for and will be able to receive notification in writing of actions taken around health and safety complaints. So right now, our administrator doesn't actually have to put anything in writing back to you. The new language will allow you to make that request, and they will have to provide that response in writing if that's what you request. In addition, we were able to get some due process improvements and clarity that made it very clear that teachers who are placed under investigation will have the right to union representation. They'll be notified of that they are under investigation, and so on and so forth. And then we were able to get the creation of a pilot program to address emergency school closures. This was probably one of the most difficult things besides the compensation package to reach agreement on. And it was one of the last things that we worked through with the employer. As many of you know, during COVID, there was a lot of ongoing and continuous bargaining that happened related to the school closures. We bargained initially in March of 2020. We then re-bargained about the school closures at the end of the school year and how teachers were going to get their classrooms closed up at the end of school year 1920. And then we ended up bargaining a pretty comprehensive MOU in the summer of 2020 for school year 2020-2021. When we went back to the bargaining table for the current contract, the employer was very much adamant that they didn't want to touch anything related to how we handled Article X, Section G, which is the language that talks about how if kids are told not to report, teachers don't report. And we knew that this was an area that probably needed to be addressed. We anticipated that the employer would bring it to the table because they really wanted some other mechanism. And we were not willing to agree to what they wanted, which was, well, principals can just tell you what to do and you got to do it. And so we were able to get the language for a 4-year pilot. It will supersede Article X, Section G of the contract for the next 4 years. And it will basically be a pilot to see whether this is working. And if it doesn't, we always have the right to say we're not going to agree to make it permanent. It outlines is the procedure for an extended emergency closure. So a closure essentially that's 2 days or more. It defines what an emergency is. We didn't want principals using this language to say things like, oh, well, we have a lack of subs, so we have an emergency. No, these are emergencies like natural disasters, water main breaks, things of that nature. It requires a notification to HSTA. One of the issues right now is oftentimes we find out many hours or days later that there was an emergency closure of a school. This requires them to provide us notice. It requires proper equipment, resources, and preparation time to be provided to the teachers. If there is going to be a pivot to an alternate learning program or learning mechanism. And there is also hold harmless language. So this is a language that says, hey, if you are a teacher who is affected by whatever this natural disaster is and so forth, you're going to be held harmless. You're not going to be told, oh, well, we got to take the leave out of your personal days or your sick days because you should have been somewhere and you couldn't because you were affected. The basic timeline for the extended emergency closures is this. On day 1, there's really no substantive change. Essentially, teachers are told not to report when students are told not to report. Principals do have the option under this agreement to ask teachers to use the time for self-directed teacher prep or PD, but again, it's self-directed, so you control it. It's not something that you can be required to go to campus for. You stay home. On the second day of an extended closure, that could be used for PD or meetings if the principal decides to ask folks to say plan for an extended closure that might go into day 3, 4, or 5. But teachers will have the option to participate virtually. They can't be forced to have to come onto campus for that meeting. And then if the closure is going to be 2 days or more than 2 days, then the school has the option on that 3rd day to pivot to an alternate instruction mode. They may not necessarily, they might choose to pivot on day 4 or 5 or 6, whatever that looks like. But they do have that option. When they're going to pivot, they do have to provide teachers a day to prep. So a lot of the timing depends on how and when they make that decision that they're going to pivot. If they make the decision early, say on day 1, they already know that it's going to be closed for a while, they can use that day to do the prep for that pivot. If the closure lasts for more than 10 school days, you are to also be provided a minimum of a half day to prep for the transition back into in-person learning. Okay. In the area of special education, I will be very frank, we were not able to secure very many improvements. The employer was very adamant that they did not want to agree to changes that would tie their hands around things like caseloads. However, they were open to agreeing to having both general ed and SPED teachers have opportunities to utilize the early release for IEP meetings. If you're a SPED teacher, you may be familiar with this option. And then we had extensive discussion about the recall pay. For those of you that may have paid close attention to our initial proposal, you will know that we proposed hourly recall. What we discovered through this bargaining process was that the department on occasion has awarded half-time recall. It was news to us because our understanding was that there was only a full day recall, but they were open to that. And so one of the commitments that they have done it's on the ending of our TA agreement is that they'll be issuing a memo. They'll be consulting with us to issue a memo around recall pay, how that works, how it can be utilized. And we plan to educate our members and continue to encourage them to be aware of their rights and really push for, if it's needed, that ability to say, hey, if you need me to work this time beyond my 7-hour day for this meeting or these other things, then can you offer me recall pay? In the area of teacher assignment and transfer, we did propose to move towards a year-round transfer program. We also proposed to allow Pro B4s to apply to transfer. However, the employer was not prepared to agree to such changes. They were open to continuing the teacher transfer work group. They are launching a new portal in the coming weeks for new hires for how they're going to be modernizing their application process. And they have committed to us that they are open to continuing the discussions about looking at some sort of pilot or expanding the transfer options in the future, but they were not prepared to agree to something to start in the next year or two. So we're going to continue that transfer work group. Our goal is to expand those transfer options. In addition, we were able to eliminate the restriction on specialty teacher exceptions that were only to secondary teachers, to add elementary school teachers into that protection. If you're not a specialty teacher, you're probably not familiar with this section of the contract, but it does come up every year for folks that are at the elementary level. And so we're able to get that exception expanded to the elementary teachers. And then we also modified the language around selection. And it now has language that says that if you're not selected for a vacancy posting, that you have the right to request and receive a written explanation from the principal who did not select you. And so that's a due process protection. We renewed a number of appendices, including the ad hoc committee, the exceptions to the agreement, which is the contract exceptions language that folks can utilize to do things like get additional waiver days. We also renewed the teacher evaluation, which is also known as the EES provision, maintaining the contractual protections in the EES Joint Committee, and the expedited appeals process, which is related to EES, and the licensing fees. Currently, licensing fees are waived by the HTSB due to how they are funded by the legislature, but we did not want to lose this benefit that if HTSB starts to charge licensing fees again, that the employer would pay for those fees. Okay. In addition, we have reached agreement to renew and create a number of work groups. And so if these are areas that you're interested in, when the contract gets ratified and we move forward into the new year, I know President Tui will be looking for folks to serve on these committees. We have an English language work group. We have a new Hawaiian education work group, a new career technical education work group, a new student discipline work group, continuation of a teacher transfer work group, and then a leave work group. There was a lot of back and forth discussion about leave at the bargaining table. We wanted changes. The department wanted changes. We could not reach agreement on what those changes would be. And so we agreed to have a work group meet over the next few years and try to see if we can come up with some additional either pilot programs or modifications. There's nothing that prevents the parties from agreeing to additional modifications mid-contract. It's pretty unusual, but it can happen, similar to how we did the MOU to bring back the 21 hours. But this work group is something that we were very interested in getting. Other miscellaneous changes that we agreed to at the table were to move towards a digital contract. Our contract is actually provided in digital format on our website as well as on our app. And in the contract, it requires the employer to provide, excuse me, a hard copy of the contract to each new hire. We have agreed to modify that language that every new hire will get instructions on how they can access the digital contract, and then they will be able to get hard copy on demand. And we're going to move towards that for our general membership as well. A lot of folks have expressed that they would like to have that as a green option. And so what we'll do is we will come up with a process by which folks can request to have the hard copy and get those to folks who want it. We updated the sign-in language with small tweaks that will allow for future electronic sign-in. The DOE has informed us that that is their plan, is to move towards an electronic sign-in, but they were not quite ready to discuss the details of that yet. They have to do some planning for that on a systems-wide basis. We were also able to eliminate some language and update language in the bell schedule section of the contract. Any of you that have worked on bell schedules will know that that section can be a bit unwieldy. We eliminated the quote more than 6 credits for secondary students and made it the more generic and expanded course offerings for all students. And that hopefully will help schools as they work on their bell schedules. And then there were a number of other non-substantive contract updates, things where we just updated things to be in line with the law or needed to update dates and things of that nature. You can access all of the TAs on our website and look at all the language on the 82 pages. And then the last piece is the letter of commitment. And so haven't got a lot of questions about this. We have utilized this concept in prior contract negotiations. It is not changing language in the contract, but it is getting the employer to agree to either do something going forward and or in this case, put out a number of memos to agree to or to address certain things. So memos to address recall pay and how it's processed, so we have something to work off of. Clarifying the end of the school year, there was a lot of discussion about report cards and the impacts, especially for elementary teachers who end up having to print those report cards, and issues where principals were trying to call faculty meetings on the teacher's last day when it's really supposed to be a work day to get your report cards done or to get your final grades in. Clarifying the school-based budgeting process and a commitment to have additional and better training around the school-based budgeting process. And then a commitment to continue the employee assistance program pending funding. So we wanted to get an employee assistance program into the contract. The employer was concerned about the ongoing cost of that, but they were committed to continuing because they see the value. And so they're willing to put out a memo to that effect. Just real quick, as I close up, and I know this is a lot to cover on the slide deck, in-person ratification is from 3 to 6 p.m. on Wednesday. The window to request absentee ballots and or alternate voting sites did close on Friday. We have actually finished up all of the materials and are getting those out to the various folks who are running the poll sites across the state as we speak. The results will be announced the night of the 26th. However, they will be updated. Those totals will be updated as we can accept and will accept absentee ballots through May 3rd. Final fiscal decking at the legislature is April 28th, and we are working with legislators as we speak to ensure that the monies are put into the appropriation bills and can get passed out and signed into law by Governor Green. But we do have to notify them of the ratification by Wednesday evening. Okay, so I'm gonna stop my share. And I think there probably are a number of questions that have come in, Osa, and knowing you, maybe you've been answering them, I'm not sure.
Yeah, we'll go to some questions. Who gets to vote on the contract? What is the requirement for ratification of the contract?
So who gets to vote on the contract is anyone in bargaining unit 5, an employee of bargaining unit 5. Not just members of HSTA. Some of you folks may be aware of the few people who have never joined HSTA. They are allowed to vote on the contract. And the ratification threshold is 50% plus 1 of those who vote. So really important that you go out and vote.
Who's counting the votes?
So at the various ratification sites, there will be poll site workers who are your colleagues, HSTA members, who will open up the ballot box at 6 o'clock or when the last person that's in the room votes. They'll open that up and they will count it, and it will be counted a second time. And then the tally will be written down and it will be called into the office. folks are welcome to observe that counting process. And here at the office, we will have other HSTA members counting the few votes that sometimes come in from absentee.
Yeah, so the announcement will be made on April 26th, but will ballots that come in after that continue to be counted?
Yes, they will up until May 3rd.
And will that change the outcome?
There is a possibility, but it's a very low possibility considering our historic vote turnout is the vast majority of people go to the poll sites. So we don't anticipate that the absentee will overwhelm the amount of people that show up to vote.
Yeah, so that's why I want to make sure everybody goes out to vote. We need as many as we can so that if the absentees are a certain amount, it still won't affect the.
Yep.
the
Really
finalists.
important to make the legislative deadline. We could have told people, no, you had to get it in by the 26th, but that makes it a really tough turnaround. So.
Thank you. So what happens if the contract is voted down?
So lots of questions about that, a lot of speculation out there. And I think there's a lot of misinformation about what that means. What it doesn't mean is that we go back to the table and the starting point is the settlement point, right? Because we settled on a package. The parties said, okay, we're going to agree to this package of things. And we gave a little, they gave a little, and this is what we came to. There are no guarantees that that is going to be the starting place. So we would have to send our team back to the table and we would have to sit down with the employer and see where they're at and whether they are willing to start at the place we left off or not. It gets very complicated when a contract gets voted down. And I'll just say the last time that happened in January of 2012, we did not reach an agreement on a new contract for over a year. It will also mean that we will absolutely miss the final fiscal decking at the state legislature. Why does that matter? It matters for a couple of reasons. One is the legislature, as we speak, is doing the final deal cutting of where they're going to spend money. If they find out that we voted our contract down, there opens up over $500 million that can be spent on something else. So the money may not be there for the governor to offer it as we go forward. And then it also means that we have to wait until the next legislative session, which would be spring of 24, for any funding. So even if we went back to the table, even if we settled the contract later in May or June, the legislature has to push out or approve the appropriations. The governor can't just force that to happen. The superintendent can't just force that to happen. And so we would have to wait for the next legislative session for folks to benefit from any of the funding that would come with any raises that are negotiated. And so that means on a practical standpoint, we have this artificial earlier deadline of the fiscal decking and the ledge. We missed that deadline through a contract being voted down. We go back to the table, we see where things stand. It will not be a good situation, but we will move forward with it. And then from a practical standpoint, that means no one is going to get raises going forward. The other piece is that it means that no agreement means that our employees, the bargaining unit 5 employees, will take on the full burden of any increases in the healthcare premiums. So the current contract says if there's no negotiated agreement, the current contributions to the premiums will go forward. But the cost of health insurance is going up. And so employees would take on that full burden of the increased cost above whatever the employer is currently paying. Okay. There were a couple of other questions that came in as well related to this OSA around, is there a way to revisit some of the items from the original proposal which have been removed? My answer to that would be, it depends. For the most part, many of those items have already been rejected formally at the bargaining table by the employer. And so that means the answer is no, they have rejected it. For example, our new salary construct was flat out rejected at the table by the employer. And so there's no obligation for them to reconsider and say, oh yeah, no, we have to look at it again. It's been rejected. And then one of the questions was, if we're voting no, are we working without a contract? What does that mean? What it means is that generally the current contract goes forward. What is untested waters is what happens to all the MOUs. So you have supplementary pay in the MOUs, you have EES, you have things in the MOUs that have either protection or cost items. And we also have the 21 hours. So there is a chance that the employer could play hardball and say, we're going to let all those items sunset because they do have a sunset date. And come July 1, 21 hours goes. And what does that mean? That means another 1.5% cut from our pay. And so that's the reality that happens potentially when you're quote unquote working without a contract or working beyond the term of the contract. And then another individual had asked Osa if the no strike rule is forever. The no strike rule has to do with the language in our contract for duration. And so when you have a contract, part of the deal that is cut between the employer and the union is that you can't strike for the duration of that contract. And so right now that is through June 30th of 2023.
Why did HSTA wait until April and the session was about to close to negotiate?
So we've been technically open with bargaining since last summer. Both sides agreed to wait to get into the more intensity of the bargaining until December after the new governor was in place and he could appoint his chief negotiator from the employer side. But we were fully ready to go. We've been bargaining since December with multiple dates at the table. This is the structure that the world works economically in the state of Hawaii. We are funded at the state level. Unlike other places in the continental United States, where you have a school board who is funded through local property taxes, who can cut a deal and potentially start paying people a pay raise tomorrow once it's ratified, that is not how ours worked. And it is not uncommon, in fact, very common, that we always end up having to settle our contracts in the month of April as the deadline for the legislative funding looms closer and closer. That is when the employer starts to get a little more serious about offering more money. And that's when HSTA has to look a little bit more about, okay, are we going to move off of different proposals to get that true package deal to that we believe that can be ratified.
Let's see. Do supplementary pay and bonuses count towards retirement?
Depends. If you were hired before July 1 of 2012, the answer is yes. If those additional pay are in your high 3 calculation, then yes, they calculate. So whether it's supplementary pay, lump sum bonuses, things of that nature. If you were hired after July 1 of 2012, then you have a high 5 calculation. And the only thing that can be calculated in your high 5 is shortage differential. So a very specific type of differential.
How can I find my pay raise under the new contract?
Very good question. We do have 2 salary schedule documents. I'll just share my screen here, Osa. And I believe our communications people will probably put a link in the chat as well. These will be available. These are available on our website. They will also be available at the poll sites on Wednesday. If you want a hard copy, they'll have some at the info tables. And so we did the calculations on this. I will note, we believe that they're very close. They might be $1 or so off because again, we are working through the final salary schedules with the employer. When you get to rounding and how many numbers you use for rounding, sometimes it can get a little bit goofy. But we are working through that. And what you do is you start wherever your step and class is, and then it will tell you each year here on the left where you move to and your dollar amount. These dollar amounts do not reflect any $3,000 bonuses, do not reflect the $2,500 for folks who complete their probationary period. They also do not reflect shortage differentials or national board certification, any of all those sort of what I like to call the more hidden additional pay that people can do to increase their pay. A couple of things, we had some people ask us, well, where's step 4? Well, step 4 doesn't exist right now, so nobody's on step 4. If this is ratified, you will move to step 4. And for those of you at step 1, 2, and 3, that has been factored already. And you will see, for example, this person is moved to step 4 in the first year, and that rate of pay is $50,000, right? So it is on here. It's just nobody exists in step 4 right now, so you wouldn't find it on this chart because this is just kind of an interpretation for you to be able to figure out where you're going to move to. The other question that we had was, we had some people ask us, I'm on step 14, how come 14B and step 14 and 14A are all going to end up at 78,720 in the last year of the contract? Well, that's because after 2 years, step 14 will have been moved up to 14B. So be aware of that.
And Andy, if you look on the left, by the year 26, 27, up on those
Yes.
top ones, there's those little indicators.
Yes,
That
the
you
little
can
cross
look at
and
the
the-
bottom, the dagger and the asterisk, yeah.
Yeah. So those are the years that we get class 8, which potentially can be another 4% on your schedule or on your pay, and then the one-time bonuses. Okay. All
I'm
right.
currently on leave, a long-term leave. Will I still qualify for the lump sum payments?
Yes, when you return, if you're on paid leave, you'll get it in your normal paycheck. If you're on unpaid leave, when you return, you'll get it into your paycheck when you return.
On those charts you showed, what is BB? What is AA? What is that?
So on the charts that we create and on salary schedules, you will never find anything that says AA and BB. However, if you're a DOE employee and you receive a Form 5, it'll say something like 06BB. That means that you are class 6, 14B. The problem is the DOE box doesn't fit 3 characters. It can't fit a 1, 4, and an A. It can only fit 2 characters. And so when you move to 14A, it says AA, and when you move to 14B, it says BB.
This is far off from HSTA's original proposed salary package. What happened?
Well, that's how bargaining goes. We decided to be very transparent as we have in recent years. The team felt very strongly they wanted to share the initial proposal. Of course, as with any bargain, we would also want to try and strive for the best possible contract. The team does feel that this is the best possible deal we could get. The state was very firm. They were not looking to spend anything more than the $577 million that we reached in those final hours of the bargain. That $577 million does not include any of the anticipated costs for those reclassifying to class 8. And so there is potential there for that added cost in the value to the whole unit. We felt that it was more important for us to get the settlement, to get money in people's pockets going forward. We felt that it was a fair settlement. It gave steps in each year. And so that's where we're at. Osa, I don't know if you want to add anything more to that. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, my laptop lagged or something, so the
Okay.
unmute wasn't showing up. I don't even remember what you're talking about, so I'll just move on to the next question.
What happened to the initial proposal versus what we settled for? Anything else you want to add?
I'll say that the state had their own initial proposals, and that was totally demolished as well.
Yeah.
Because we were holding back hard. You've checked that email that we sent out on April 16th, I believe, the Sunday. You'll see all of the things that they were trying to push on us that we held back on. So one of the things in negotiations is not like, what did we get, but what did we protect our members from? What happened to class 8? What's up with that? It isn't fair that there are restrictions on how to and when we are able to reclassify.
Yeah, I mean, I think I tried to cover some of that in the slide deck when I was going through that earlier. You know, they wanted to do 30 credits. We were able to get it negotiated back down to 15. The employer was not willing to agree to just no rules, meaning no additional restrictions. It was going to be very expensive if they agreed to that, and that was in part of the calculation that they were doing. And they also were very adamant that they wanted to incentivize people continuing to pursue professional development. And so that's where we landed on an agreement to get Class 8 added. I will note this is something we've been trying to get added to the contract for at least a decade or more. It involved a lot of additional work behind the scenes with the legislature last year to get some of the restrictions in the law actually changed to even be able to add a Class 8 to the schedule.
We're getting a lot of questions about, so what about if I took these courses in college before I was hired, or what about courses I had? Will those count?
Yeah, so so prior to employment coursework does not count for reclassification. So you're zeroed out, you get initially placed at BA, master's, or doctorate. That rule has been in place for 20 years. You don't get to bank those credits. That is a function of the way the state law is structured around the employer controlling reclassification process, and that changed 20 years ago. If you earned EL type credits, you will need to check with the department to see if they can be qualified and used. If they are SIQ, they meet that qualification, you potentially could use them if you earn them since you began working in the department. However, there is that reclassification rule that your principal has to approve them. And so hopefully you still have your documentation related to that.
Are we going to put the slide deck that you presented somewhere on our website, like hsta.org?
We can. Yeah, that's fine, Osa. I can convert it to a PDF and make that available.
Do the new rules for using credits to reclassify apply to all reclassifications? What if I'm finishing up credits right now or have additional 21-hour credits or other credits that I didn't use to reclass?
Yeah, the new rules only apply to Class 7 to Class 8 in the third year of this contract. So going forward from that, once Class 8 is created, they only apply to that. If you're working on credits to go from 2 to 3, 3 to 4, etc., all the way up to Class 7, it is the same current rules, which is 15 credits. You can use your 21 hours. You can use accommodation of 21 hours and other PD or university coursework.
So if I'm registered to start a new PD course soon, later this month or this summer, the course will end after July 1st. Will those credits earned from this course be eligible to move from Class 7 to 8 in the third year?
Yes. So we did confirm, that was part of the discussion at the table, but we also went back and reconfirmed because we were getting that question quite a bit. We had a number of people say that they were considering unenrolling in coursework this summer. As long as the end date of the course is after July 1, you can use those for Class 8.
So Class 8 opens in year 3 of the contract.
Correct. Year 3 of the contract. So by that time, everybody will have earned 6 credits of 21 hours. I will note this was a huge thing at the table because the employer sees those 6 credits as being kind of like too easy for folks. And so that is in part why they didn't want to just make it completely open, because they knew that they would potentially have everybody reclassing in that first year.
So if I met the SIQ or the sheltered instruction qualification requirement using other options besides PD courses, such as the 72 hours of seat time, or via obtaining TESOL licensure status, or micro-credentials in TESOL, am I still eligible to submit 15 PD credits for Class 8?
Yes. Having the SIQ is a requirement to apply for Class 8. How you get it doesn't matter. There's 7 options. If any of those credits, if you use the option to earn PD credits you can use those credits for class 8 as well. So for example, in the third year, you'll have 6 hours of 21-hour credits. And then if you take another 2 classes for your SIQ, you'll have another 6 hours. And then you would just have to make up the last class, 1 additional class of PD or university credits to earn your 15.
So what about people who don't work with students or don't work with EL students?
EL students.
Yeah.
So this came up at the bargaining table. The department has decided that they are going to be expanding the requirement to everyone. There's been a lot of confusion. Initially, their position was only if you work directly with students would you have to get a classroom teacher. But the expectation was that if you ever had to go back into the classroom, you needed to secure it right away. They are going to put out a memo that will indicate that everyone will have to secure those credits. I have not seen that memo yet. I know they're working on it. One of the concerns we've already brought to them and we brought to them at the bargaining table was the issue that many of the PD coursework requires you to interact with students to be able to do your portfolio and things. And so that's a continuing thing we're going to be advocating and talking to the department about.
Why did HSTA not push harder to get compression adjustments on the salary schedule for teachers with prior non-bargaining Unit 5 teaching experience?
We propose multiple configurations to try and address this issue. As folks know, we initially proposed up to 22 years. That was to match the salary compression dynamic that we were able to get for folks last fall. The employer flat out rejected every single possible configuration to either increase the total number of years that they would recognize coming in from 6 and or to give any sort of assessment and adjustment for people with prior experience in education for a compression like adjustment. What we were able to get was the $3,000.
How does the SIQ requirement impact teachers in Hawaiian language immersion positions for reclassifying to Class 8? We were told that HLIP teachers would be exempt from the SIQ requirement. Did that change too?
As of right now, it has not, but we anticipate that it will. We were told at the table that they wanted this. When we brought up those issues, they told us that their plan was to require it for everyone.
Do these requirements apply to charter schools?
They do, in the sense that that is the reclassification rules for in our contract. And this is a federal mandate that teachers need to have this type of sheltered instructional professional development or learning or training. And charter schools are held to the same federal laws as DOE school.
Well, teachers who are already on 14B prior to the compression adjustments received a $3,000 lump sum for not receiving a compression movement and also received $3,000 for the lack of a step movement in the school year 23-24 for a
Yes,
total of $6,000.
yes, that is correct.
Does that count towards retirement calculations?
Same rules as I discussed earlier. If you were hired before July 1 of 2012, the answer is yes. After July 1 of 2012, the answer is no. And for most people, in fact, I think all people right now, if you're at 14B, you were definitely hired before July 1 of 2012.
So what if I'm half-time instead of full-time?
They did not ask for any sort of proration. So if you're half-time, you will be getting the full bonuses. There's nothing in the language that prorates them.
And what if I'm only planning to work until December instead of the whole year?
There's no rules about proration. You will get the full bonus at the start of the year.
So we're still going to get the PD credits for completing 21 hours of job and professional development, right?
Yes, those will still happen on an annual basis.
Can I opt out if I don't like them?
Unfortunately, no.
Okay, so this is a big one. What happened with SPED? Wasn't it a priority to try and address special education issues?
It absolutely was. We spent many of our hours at the table discussing around and around and around about SPED issues, proposing different concepts, different variations of what we proposed. And we were really only able to get 2 adjustments. One is to add the general education teachers to the ability to do the early release for IEPs. And then there was a small adjustment related to equipment that basically changed the language to make it clear that it's necessary for folks to have things like computers and so forth to be able to do the job of a SPED teacher. We also got the letter of commitment about recall pay. So HSTA plans to do a lot of work around educating folks around their rights of volunteering versus, you know, saying, hey, I need to be provided the time either in the workday or explain to your principal that they have the option to give you recall pay or offer that.
What happened with the class size issues or the counselor to student ratio issues? Don't see anything there.
Yeah, we did propose a counselor to student ratio. The employer rejected that. They also rejected our class size proposals, indicating that they did not want to be locked into any specific ratios, that made it really, really hard to do academic financial planning, and kind of went against the spirit of the law in which schools are supposed to be able to control their budgets. And that they rejected those proposals.
Why did we need to wait so long for this webinar? The ratification vote is in 2 days. There's not much time to think things through.
Well, based on our experience in the past, we wanted to spend time and be prepared to ask questions. And that is in part why we did it. We also planned and it gave 1 day in between. We had the advantage of a little bit more time this time around, but that was part of the structuring of the webinar for today.
Was anything in the back of the contract not renewed?
Yes, there are a couple of items. So the hard to staff locations was not renewed because that was absorbed into the shortage differentials, which were expanded in 2020. And the travel and per diem MOU was not renewed because that was addressed in the travel improvements that we got in the main body of the contract.
So all of the hard to fill and all that stuff is still covered?
So it's covered via the shortage differentials.
Is that in the contract?
No, those are implemented by the employer.
If someone can't opt out of the 21 embedded hours, what happens to those who don't show up on extra hour days? What happens if they do not make it up at a later time?
Yeah, so currently you are required to make it up if the principal asks you. We anticipate that that rule is still going to apply. And in theory, you could be directed to make up that time because you are paid for it. And if you refuse, you could be disciplined. I will tell you that since 2013, I'm unaware of anybody that has been disciplined for not making up the hours. You definitely will not get the credits.
Wait, where did it go? There we go. Please clarify, how does the SIQ requirements again affect counselors and SSCs?
It's our understanding that everyone will have to secure SIQ going forward, and that there will be a memo forthcoming. Right now, the current process is that only if you're a classroom teacher. We anticipate that memo will change. And if you want to reclass, you will have to obtain those credits.
Yeah, and I'll say that.
Or those, that I should say that qualification, because it doesn't necessarily have to be credits.
I'll say that I specifically asked the superintendent, what about some of the non-classroom teachers who don't work with students? And he said the department's belief is that everyone can benefit from getting that training, those credits, the PD. So here's a different one. Any idea when or if per diem rates might increase? It's been the same rate over 20 years.
Per diem rates. No, that was not something that we talked about very extensively. We dabbled on it a little bit in bargaining. The thing that the employer did tell us is that they are working on putting together a program to allow people to get that in advance. One thing I will note, there is language, the most expensive thing tends to be like the hotels. There is language that says if the hotels are more, that you can get the difference. So just make sure if you feel like you're out of pocket for travel, that you talk to your UNISERV, because we can work with you and your school to make sure that gets taken care of.
There are a bunch of questions about recall pay. Can you talk more about the recall pay and what qualifies? If I got somebody was asking about, if I have to close up my classroom at the end of the year, can I get recall pay to do that?
That's what your last teacher workday is for. So you're already paid to do that. I'll read you the language out of the contract. Teachers may voluntarily report to duty without compensation, or teachers who are officially recalled to duty by the employer according to established procedures and who agree to perform work shall be compensated at the rate of 1/190 times their annual salary. So there's a calculation there. I will note that that changes to 193 days with this contract. It's actually been 193 days basically since 2013 because of the 21 hours except for last year. So if you volunteered to give up your time to come in on a weekend, a holiday, to stay late, that's on you. But if there are particular things that the administration wants you to come in and work on, you could be recalled. The types of things that we have seen people recalled for are things like coming in the summer to do planning as a department head, doing IEP work during a break or a holiday. What we're trying to work towards is really getting teachers to understand that this could be used for more than it is, but you have to stand your ground and stop volunteering to come in on those days when you don't have work to do those special projects or those things related to your position. And this is part of the longer term education that we're going to be working on going forward.
There were a bunch of questions about how were the supplementary pay categories chosen? What about yearbook? What about dance? What about people who have to teach courses where they have to go purchase things for their culinary course? All of those things, why weren't those taken into consideration?
So the supplementary pay categories have been added to the contract over the years. They actually have not been changed in a couple of decades. The team took the feedback from what we got from the field, and that is in part why we came up with the proposal to add club advisors. For the culinary question, your administration should be giving you work time to go and do that purchasing of food. Like that's what your prep time can be used for. And you can seek out and see if they'll give you additional time if that's needed. But club advisors, yearbook advisors, those kinds of things, yearbook advisors tend to get additional periods to do the work. But it varies from school to school. But we based our proposals based on the feedback we got.
Last one that came in. Can you confirm that teachers are getting raises annually in this contract?
Yes.
All right. Looks like we're coming up on the top of the hour, Andy. So thank you so much. There's a lot more questions. I'm sorry, we don't have time to keep going. Are there other ways that people can get their questions answered, or?
So we are continuing to update our FAQs as they come in, as questions come in. We're trying to get the most common questions, put them on our FAQs. There will be info tables at all of the ratification sites manned with either HSTA leaders and or like elected leaders like chapter presidents and or negotiations committee or team members and or staff at every ratification site. So I would encourage you folks, if you have a burning question we didn't get to, please seek those folks out at the info tables and they can try to address the question. In addition, as questions come in through info, the info question thing on our website, they are being redirected to the UNISERV directors who can get back to you and try to answer your questions as well.
All right. Just want to thank the team. I want to thank our staff members, Andrea and Colleen Bird, who were amazing, and Mari Cardenas, who did behind the scenes and got everything prepped for us. Thank you to you. Thank you to all of you for sticking by your team. We're looking forward to getting this ratified on Wednesday. We need all of you to go out and, oh, I forgot, yeah, wear your red shirts. Hopefully you got your new red shirts. If you haven't, make sure you talk to your head faculty rep, because they got to be ordered by May 1st. Otherwise, we're going to have to wait till next year to get them to you at your school. So wear your red shirts on Wednesday, or wear on Tuesday and Wednesday. Thank you so much. And, you know, I have to also thank Governor Green, because things were getting stuck a little bit at the end. And if he didn't come in, this would have happened even later, which would have been very bad. So mahalo to all of you who are watching live. Mahalo to all of you who are watching the recording of this. We'll see you on April 26th at your voting sites. Mahalo.
Mahalo, everyone.